Hello. One of my goals for 2024 was to read 12 books. And with Spotify Premium now including 15 hours of free audiobook listening, and with the addition of a library card and access to Libby, I read 105 books. My neighbors had my dongle. I needed my dongle back. Most of the 105 books that I read after the tracking for Spotify Wrapped ended. So that's the end of October through December. And like any reasonable person might be asking right now, how did you listen to that many books in that short of a time frame? When you listen to them on 3 times speed, they really go a whole lot faster. I was at work one day and someone wanted to know like what it was like to listen to a book on 3 times speed. So I took out my headphones and I started playing the book that I was listening to. And I was listening to a book about testosterone at the time. And it was embarrassing to like play this out loud and them be talking about like undescended testicles. So I played it for just a little bit and I stopped it and I was like, that's okay. And the person looked at me and she went, was that a Spotify ad? Like, I was sitting there really worried that she was going to question me as to why I was listening to something about undescended testicles while at work. And no, she did not understand a single word. Anyways, this is all just to say that I read a lot this year, and I would like to go over the top fiction, top nonfiction, and worst books that I read this year. Of the 105 books that I read this year, I would guesstimate that probably 92 of them were nonfiction. I really enjoy reading nonfiction. I feel like it helps me understand the world that's around me. I like to read about social justice. My degree is in gender studies, so I read a lot about gender studies. I read a lot about race relations. But I did still read a few fiction books. So first things first, we're gonna go over the top 5 fiction books that I read this year. Starting off at number 5. This year I reread the Hunger Games trilogy, and I also read the prequel, so now technically is it a quadrilogy? So number 5 on my list is gonna be just the classic The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is a young adult novel, so like it's not a very difficult read, but I do think it actually has a really good critical analysis of like class and class structures. Like we have a protagonist who is poor, and the beginning of the book is her talking about her daily life being poor and just kind of what that looks like for her, what her day-to-day is like. And then she gets flung in a to-the-death battle with a bunch of other teens, and the to-the-death battle is solely for entertainment purposes, to keep the underclass. Like, Suzanne Collins really did that, and I was like 13 reading that, like, oh, this is a very good book, and now I'm 25 reading it, like, she really encapsulated class struggle. How did she do that in a YA book? Moving on to number 4. Number 4 on my list is There's No Way I'd Die First by Lisa Springer. This was another young adult novel, specifically a horror, specifically a slasher. It was terrible in all of the best ways. The book is about this girl, I think she's 17 years old, and she is an influencer. She is a TikTok star. You want to know how many followers she has? 40,000. And she's not just a TikToker, she's not a one-trick pony. She actually does podcasts too. The podcast that she does, she reviews horror movies. She's a giant horror fan. So what she decides that she's gonna do is she's gonna throw a party for all of the other hashtag influencers at her school, all of the cool people. And she thinks that this party, because she's inviting all the cool people who have a social media presence, like it's gonna be perfect to promote her podcast. Everyone shows up to her mansion and she's like, guys, I have a big surprise for tonight. What's the surprise? She hired a clown to play hide and seek with them. This is a horror book, so we can all kind of guess what's gonna happen, right? The clown starts killing people. Literally the whole book is just how do we escape from this murderous clown. This was another one that I started reading at work, and I actually had to stop reading it at work because I was visibly cringing. Like I was sitting at my computer just going, ugh. But if I have one weakness, it is bad horror. The book itself, actually terrible. It's kind of like the author just learned what a metaphor is for the first time in her life, and she decides, I'm gonna do a book of just metaphors. So it seems like every paragraph there's a metaphor. And it's not well written, but it's so entertaining. It's so funny. Like, it's supposed to be a horror, and it's not. It's pure comedy. Moving on to number 3, we have Welcome to Night Vale, the novel by Joseph Fink. If you're not familiar, Welcome to Night Vale is actually a podcast. It aired in, I think, 2012, and it's still going. They've got hundreds of episodes. The podcast is presented as a radio show. So the whole podcast like premise is we're going to sit here and we're going to listen to the news. But the news is like weird. Like they're in this town where science doesn't work, time doesn't work. There are angels, but you're not allowed to like acknowledge their existence. There's a secret police force. There's a man in a tan jacket with a deerskin suitcase, but whenever you look at him and turn away, then like you don't remember that you saw him. Like it's Twilight Zone-y. The book Welcome to Night Vale follows two individuals. So we have Jackie, who runs a pawn shop. She's 19 years old. And we have Diane, who is a single mother who is, if her age is announced, I do not remember what it is. Someone comes into Jackie's pawn shop one day and leaves her a note that says King City. She holds onto the note. She lets it go. The note's back in her hand. It says King City. She can't get rid of this note. And so she's like, what on earth is King City? Diane works in an office, and one of her coworkers one day is just like not working there anymore, and so she goes, hey, what happened to Evan? And everyone goes, who's Evan? Diane's son also decides that now is the time where he wants to learn about his dad because he's been raised by a single mother, and she's like, I don't really want to tell you about your dad. Jackie and Diane's stories intertwine, and they all end up revolving around King City. So they're trying to figure out what is King City, and also how do we get there? Because it should be just like right up the road, but there aren't actually any roads that go there. Like the roads look like they go there, but they don't actually go there. We do also get Cecil, the radio host. He pops in every once in a while to give us more of like an overarching, omniscient perspective onto what's happening. If you haven't listened to the podcast, or if you're not really a big fan of it, I don't think you'll really enjoy this book, but as like a sort of listener to the podcast, I thought it was a really good book. Moving on to number 2, we have The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one really surprised me. I knew absolutely nothing about it except that it was recommended to me by a friend. And so when I started listening to it, I had to actually Google if it was fiction or nonfiction because it sounded so real. Evelyn Hugo is a fictional Hollywood star, like an olden days Hollywood star. At the start of the book, she's like auctioning off a bunch of her old dresses. And so the writer is working at a magazine and they want to do a story about the dresses. And Evelyn Hugo says, hey, I don't want one of your more seasoned writers, I want her. So this writer goes to Evelyn Hugo's house and is like, okay, let's get going. We're going to do this story about the dresses. Not sure why you want me. And Evelyn stops her and says, hey, actually, I don't want to tell you about these dresses. You are going to write a novel about my life. So we get to hear all of these like old-timey Hollywood stories. And also we get the present day of this writer trying to figure out like why Evelyn wants her specifically, because like she doesn't have a big portfolio and she's like, I don't know what you have to do with me. This isn't something that I would like normally read or pick out for myself, but I'm glad that I took the recommendation because it did end up being a very good book. And number 1, the best fiction book that I read this year is The Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is another book that was advertised as a young adult, like kind of in the horror genre. Our main character is a trans Latino boy in a family of brujos. A brujo is someone who helps people who have died find their way into the afterlife. It's a very gendered thing, so only the men, only the males can be brujos. If you're not a male, you're a bruja, which is like a witch. The witches, they can't help people cross over, but they can heal living people. With the main character being trans, the story is really him trying to prove that he has what it takes to be a brujo. His family doesn't believe that he can be a brujo because he is transgender. So he goes behind his family's back, he gets the blessing to become a brujo, and at that time, one of his cousins dies. Because it's all like supernatural, they can like feel that his cousin has died, but they can't find his body. So everyone is out searching for his cousin, and he goes like, I want to help you, like, let me help you. And his dad is like, no, this is only for the brujos. Go sit with all the other women. So to try and prove himself as a brujo, he says, okay, I am going to figure out what happened on my own. He goes out, he doesn't find his cousin's spirit, he does find a different spirit, and he says, okay, if I can help this one spirit into the afterlife, I am a brujo. The spirit that our main character ends up meeting doesn't at first realize that he's dead. And when he does realize he's dead, he says that, no, I'm not going. I'm not leaving this plane of existence. So the whole story ends up being this trans Latino boy trying to prove himself to his family, both as a brujo and as just a boy. And the only way that he thinks that he can do this, that he can prove to his family that he truly is a boy and by extension a brujo, is by helping the spirit cross over. So the whole book is just trying to get this one spirit to cross over, while at the same time this kid's cousin is missing. They're trying to figure out what's going on there. It's very reminiscent of if you've read Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune, but it's made for a younger audience. I do also think there's better representation in The Cemetery Boys as compared to Under the Whispering Door, because while they both are queer, with The Cemetery Boys we specifically get queer and trans and also Latinx. I really liked this book. I think it ended a lot better than Under the Whispering Door, which kind of surprised me because it was meant for a younger audience. But I think maybe I just like young adult novels. Like, 3 of my top 5 books this year were young adult novels, all kind of in the horror-y genre. I guess The Hunger Games isn't quite horror, but like, it's a bunch of kids fighting to the death. Like, that's dystopian at least. Moving on to nonfiction. In my list, I actually wrote down my top 10 nonfiction of the year, but in the interest of time, I will just go over the top 5. Number 5 on my list is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is a memoir by the child actor who is very famously known for her role as Sam in the TV show iCarly. In this memoir, we really get to learn all about how Jeanette McCurdy got into acting. We get to hear about how she grew up in a very poor family, and once she started acting, acting became like their main source of income. We get to hear about this tumultuous relationship that she had with her mother, where the only way she could really earn her mother's praise or care was if she was dieting, if she was losing weight, if she was skinny. This book, I will say, gigantic trigger warning for eating disorders and addiction. This was actually the first book that I read in 2024, and I think it was a very good start to the year. I think this was a really good look into the child acting industry, specifically how it's just filled with sexual abuse and substance issues and exploitation. I think this was also a really good look into how people can have relationships with their parents that aren't good. And that can be frowned upon in society to say, like, I don't have a good relationship with my parents, or I don't have a relationship with my parents, or the extreme, my mom died and I'm glad of that. You really do just get Jeanette's story of this is how my mom royally screwed up. And while I may be sad to not have that relationship anymore, while it's maybe sad that she's no longer with us, I also feel some sense of relief because now I have some sense of freedom that I didn't have before. Moving on to number 4 in nonfiction, I have Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. This is actually a collection of speeches and essays, and I'm usually not much of an anthology person, but I thought this worked very well. Audre Lorde is a very famous Black, lesbian, feminist author. In Sister Outsider, we get a lot of works related to her identity and how she has to navigate the intersections of her identity, how she's not just Black, how she's not just a lesbian, how she's not just a woman. And being part of all of these communities really informs her experience and how she has to navigate this world. In this, we get a lot about intersectionality and how we can't look at our identities in like a vacuum. We have to look at how they intersect with each other. She talks about how her experience as a Black woman is different than a lot of other Black women because she is also gay. She talks about how her experience as a lesbian is different than a lot of other lesbians because she is also Black. As someone who has a degree in gender studies, I loved this because it's not just about gender. It's not just about sexuality. It's not just about race. It's about all of these things. And we get so many works where we get to see slightly different angles, but it's all Lorde talking about her own life and how she has to navigate the world as a person who holds these specific identities. Moving on to number 3, I have Unwell Women, Misdiagnosis and Myth in a Man-Made World by Eleanor Cleghorn. I don't know if any of you know who Sarah Shower is. She used to be on Vine. What was one of her big vines? Excuse me, miss, what's the weather for outside seating? You came in from the outside. Anyways, I bring Sarah Shower up because she also read this book this year, and in her TikTok book review of the year, she said that she was waiting for the author to talk about disability and it just never came up. And I had to take a step back at that because I said, wait a minute, I read that book. I really liked that book. I thought that was a very good book. But I don't think Sarah's wrong. I think she's right that the author didn't really look into disability justice. And with a book with the title Unwell Women, like, Yeah, maybe the author should have talked about disability justice. So I do think that this is going to be worth a reread in 2025 with a different lens. But from the lens of historical feminism, or feminism historically, I think it does a very good job. It tells the story of the history of women's medicine, ways in which women have been failed in the healthcare system, how these myths were made up about the female body. It takes a really feminist look into the history of women's healthcare. We get a lot of stories about women who practiced healthcare when they weren't allowed to. We get stories about people like Florence Nightingale and how she became a champion for women's health. We get stories about the diagnosis of hysteria and how it was just, wow, women just, they're hysteric. Like, that's gotta be it. They don't have any real health issues, they're just hysteric. Turns out they were, in fact, real health issues. We get a historical perspective on how there are still certain biases that exist in the medical field and how those came along and how those are impacting women now. I did really enjoy this. Again, I do think I'm going to need to reread it and think of it from a different lens, because I don't think that my first read took into account all of the things that it should have taken into account, specifically disability. Moving on to number 2, I have Educated by Tara Westover. Educated is another memoir, and it specifically talks about someone who grew up very, very, very religious, very right-wing, like their parents didn't want them to go to public school because public school is bad. Public school is not just bad, it's dangerous. It's a threat to us existing. So she grows up in this Mormon home, not allowed to seek a full education, and eventually wants one. Her parents aren't very happy about that, because they think that becoming educated is going to pull her away from their religion, pull her away from them, pull her away from the role that they think that she needs to play. And they're right, that's what happens. She gets educated, she goes to college, she gets a PhD, and suddenly the world makes much more sense. The world doesn't look as scary anymore. We get a really good look into how there can be gender biases in organized religion. We also get a really good look into how organized religion, when taken to the extreme, is dangerous. I think this book really does stress the importance of education, and not even necessarily like a public education, but just being educated, seeking out facts, learning your place in the world, how you relate to other people, how you want to relate to other people, how your identity impacts your experience, impacts others' experiences. I feel that this story really is a very good reminder of no one can take your education away from you. Like, once you have that, you have that. And number 1 on my nonfiction list for this year was Dear Jacob, A Mother's Journey of Hope by Patty Wetterling. This, like many of the other books that I read this year, falls loosely under the category of memoir. Jacob Wetterling was an 11-year-old boy who was kidnapped from a small Minnesota town in the late 80s. His family searched for nearly 27 years to find the truth about what happened to him. In this memoir, we get the entire story of Jacob Wetterling, his disappearance, everything that happened afterward, how his disappearance changed certain policies, how his disappearance impacted his family, how Patty decided that she wanted to run for office, and she ran for office a couple times. We get to hear all about this tragedy and the fight to figure out what happened to Jacob, as well as how Jacob and his story changed things in the United States, how there was real policy change that happened because of what happened to Jacob Wetterling. Growing up in Minnesota, Jacob Wetterling was a household name. Like, I remember very clearly sitting at the dining room table once and talking about Jacob Wetterling and asking my family, like, do you think they're ever gonna find him? I think Patty Wetterling does an excellent job at telling her story, telling Jacob's story, doing the story justice, as well as showing us that real change can happen. Though the story is terribly sad and doesn't end up the way that anyone was hoping for, Like, people were hoping that he would be found alive, even after all the years. Patty talks about how she needed to keep hope that they would find him alive because that was the only way that she could get through it. If you're from Minnesota, I would very much recommend reading this because it does hit very close to home. Even if you're not from Minnesota, I think this is a very important story because, again, it shows us how important hope can be, and at the same time it shows us that real change is possible. And now moving on to the last part of this video, the worst 5 books that I read in 2024. Starting off strong, we have Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. I do actually have a physics and astronomy background. I wanted to be an astronomer for most of my life, went to college for physics, decided it wasn't really for me anymore. I did still get an astronomy minor, so I am not the most educated person in the world when it comes to physics and astronomy, but I know a thing or two. I thought this book was bad. Neil here really tries to introduce you to some very important astrophysical concepts, and he does it in a way that is terribly inaccessible, will make very little sense to people if they do not have an astronomy or physics background. It's terribly out of touch. Oh, he tells all these jokes that like they're supposed to be funny, but it's just like, oh my goodness, shut up. Like, you're not funny. You're just annoying. If you're looking for like an intro into astrophysics, don't read this. It's just really gonna make you feel like, wow, I really know nothing. Even with my physics background, I was like, I don't know. Number 4 on my worst books for the year, I have The Disordered Mind, What Unusual Brains Tell Us About Ourselves by Eric Kandel. I was really looking forward to this book. I thought it was gonna give me some good insight into neurodiversity. What it really did is it gave me a history of some mental illnesses, which I enjoyed. That was the best part of this book. The worst part of this book was how the author decided that mentally ill and neurodiverse people are just like not people, and they are their disorder, and that's all that they are. We get quite a few studies about like rats, and I know there are ethical implications when we're talking about human studies, but the author really is just comparing mentally ill people to rats for like the entire book. There is one section of the book that talks about gender identity, but it takes the really scientific approach of gender identity, and by a scientific approach, what I mean is he just continues to misgender and dead name people. And in a book trying to learn about neurodiversity, what I did not need was the continual othering of neurodiverse people and the othering of transgender people. Like, what is wrong with you? This was bad. Don't read this one either. The only good thing that I have to say about that book is that it did have some interesting discussion of the history of different mental illnesses. But that happened right at the very beginning, and everything else was awful. Number 3 of the worst books that I read this year was Soul City, Race, Equality, and the Lost Dream of an American Utopia by Thomas Healy. I was terribly disappointed by this book. This tells the story of someone trying to set up like an independent Black town in the South. There is a lot of history about how the government essentially was like, well, even though technically we should be giving you money, we're not going to. It is an interesting story when it comes to what happened specifically in this town. The book itself is awful. There was one review I read that said that it was written like a newspaper, and I was like, what does that even mean? It's written like a newspaper. This is like a 400-page book, and it's written like a newspaper article that just keeps on going on about nothing. It was an exhausting read. It was so disappointing. Normally with a book this length, I would have had it done in one sitting. I had to do it in about 4, because it was like I just couldn't keep going. Oh, it was exhausting. It was like I'd listen for a little bit. I was like, wow, they're just going on about nothing. I do think this book had a lot of potential, and I was really disappointed. I think it was an interesting subject matter. I think there were good points about how the government really failed them. There was an interesting discussion about how they argued that the town didn't need to be integrated because it had never been segregated in the first place, which, not sure I agree with that, but something to think about. And one of the worst things about the audiobook version of this, the person who read the book did accents for literally every person. And they weren't good. Like, we'd be talking about a British person, and suddenly we hear, hello, governor! Like, oh, it was bad. I was really disappointed in this book. I thought it was going to be good because, honestly, the cover of it was orange, and I thought that was a good sign because my favorite color is orange. I also thought it was going to be good given the subject matter, given that it was about a black town in the South in quote-unquote Klan country. But really, between the writing style, between the terrible accents, and between it just going on and on and on, I would not recommend this book. I would recommend people go out and learn a little bit about Soul City because I think it was an interesting history, but I don't think that this particular book does the story of Soul City justice. And then I have two final books, which I would argue that they could both be the worst book of the year, but if I absolutely had to pick one to be number 2, I would say The Last Days of the Dinosaurs, An Asteroid Extinction and the Beginning of Our World by Riley Black. This was another one that I was really looking forward to. I like dinosaurs, I feel like a normal amount. I mean, I have 2 of them tattooed on me, but I feel like I don't actually know a lot about the dinosaurs. So I thought this would be a really good intro into like the final days of the dinosaurs, what happened to them, how their extinction led to modern humans. This was not that. What this was an author who decided to personify dinosaurs and tell a story of this might have happened, maybe. There really was, for a science book, not a lot of science. It was mostly narratives about, imagine this, imagine what this dinosaur might be thinking. Like, what do you mean it's a dinosaur? Tell me about the asteroid. There is very little actual science, which I think was the biggest detriment to this book. This was another one that was exhausting to read because it was like, well, you just wrap it up already. And the one thing that really threw me off the most is at the end of the book, the author just comes out and is like, oh, and by the way, I'm transgender. And I don't know what that had to do with the dinosaurs. I think that this particular book would be a lot better as like a 30-minute children's special. And then number 1, the worst book that I read this year was Black Pill, How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics by L. Reeve. This was another one that I was really looking forward to. This talks about the alt-right and how people become alt-right and how they have co-opted online spaces into being this like alt-right pipeline. The author talks about like 4chan and how these online communities become echo chambers where they're just talking about how, you know, the immigrants are stealing our jobs and the gays are poisoning society and, you know, all types of things like that. And we hear about the January 6th insurrection and how like these online spaces led to real life action such as the insurrection taking place. Saying all of that, you may be like, that sounds incredible, and I really thought it would be. But my biggest issue with this book is that most of the argument in the book was, well, these people, all of them, every single one of them, they're all autistic. That's why they're alt-right, they're autistic. What? Like, you can't base your entire argument on the alt-right is the alt-right because they're all autistic. Sure, maybe some of them, probably, most likely some of them are autistic. You can't argue that their autism is the cause of their political beliefs. And it's never questioned. It just kept coming up. They're just like, oh, well, they're autistic, so that's why they all get along. Huh? And I kept waiting for the author to do any sort of disclaimer of like, remember, not all autistic people, but that never came up. I think it's very dangerous to say that the alt-right is the alt-right because they're autistic. And every other reviewer just like didn't seem to care. They're just like, yeah, this is the autism community. No, this is not the autism community. This is the alt-right. This is... Like, I'm so worked up, and I would say it's not that serious, but no, this is pretty serious. This is one that I cannot get behind this book, partially because I didn't really care to learn that much about the personal lives of the alt-right. The history of the movement, how they co-opted online spaces, that was interesting. Going so in depth into like, oh, these people have bad marriages and they're all autistic. Like, no! Don't read this book. If anyone has any book recommendations for 2025, I would love to hear them. My official goal for this year is to read 50,000 pages of books. Last year I read about 32,000. And I have like a side goal of like, what if I read 365 books? I think I can do it. I think I can do it. I can probably do it.